good afternoon, and welcome to Conversations with Faith Leaders on Health. This series looks to be a tool specifically for faith leaders of any background looking to serve a variety of communities, either through their development of a new health ministry or sustaining an already established one. I am your facilitator, Reverend Krista Forbes, and this series is hosted by Our Health Ministry and was developed in partnership with the Morehouse School of Medicine's National COVID-19 Resiliency Network. Our Health Ministry is where faith, health, technology, and community intersect to provide trusted information, tools, and connections that support faith-based organizations. I will look to have conversations with different community leaders who serve a variety of faith interests. Today, I will be joined in conversation with Reverend Dr. Khalia Williams, who is the Associate Dean of Worship and Music at the Candler School of Theology at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. And she also serves as the Executive Minister at Providence Missionary Baptist Church. Hello, Dr. Williams. How are you today?
Hello, I am well. Thank you for having me.
No problem. I'm so thankful that we could spend this time together and get into this conversation because you come from a very different background and approach to health ministry, and I really want to talk to you about that. You have done this wonderful work with the development of women's ministries. And so I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about that process that you took to decide the structure of the ministry. And overall, what was the primary focus of the ministry? And also how were you going to decide that which topics were going to be presented and addressed?
Yes, absolutely. So I will have to admit and be honest and confess
Yes.
from the very beginning that the model that I have employed in women's ministry over at Providence, it's actually, as far as its structure, I borrowed it from my previous ministry, Ray of Hope Christian Church in Decatur, Georgia. And so while I was at Ray of Hope, I was very much involved in our women's ministry leadership. And that model that I've borrowed really does seek to bring together a team of leaders. And so we have pretty much set it up where we have a team that's comprised of ministers, of lay women of the church, of deacons in the church, and we bring them together with very much intentionality and attention to diversity within that group. So, particularly making it an intergenerational group. So, we have women from different stages and seasons of life who are a part of this particular council, is what I like to call them, the leadership council. And from there, we do all of the planning and brainstorming and execution of what the women will engage in ministry in any given year. So that's kind of what the structure of the ministry looks like. And it's really a core team that then plans and offers ministry and services for the larger group of women at the church and throughout the community. As far as the primary focus for the ministry, really and truly, every year I think it changes a little bit as far as the specificity or the theme, and we lean into a lot of what the overall vision for the church is in a given year, and we want to connect with where the pastor is taking us, and then drill it down and make it relevant for the women, for the women's lives. But I will say the overarching theme for me and my own motivation really does kind of come out of just biblical principle, right? 3 John 2, beloved, I wish above all things that you would prosper and be in health, even as your soul prospers. I have held onto that as a part of my own personal journey
Okay.
in spirituality and life, and that's been a part of me for years.
Okay.
And so it naturally just shows up in my ministry, in my leadership, is ensuring that women, people, everyone, but specifically women. I am an advocate for women. Even my research is all about African American women and the way in which we navigate life and understand God. And so a big part of what I do is really all about seeking that women are finding the spaces and gaining the tools to
Mm-hmm.
be their best selves, right? So that they are completely well. So
Mm-hmm.
while we're out here growing spiritually, our physical beings are also growing and prospering and in good health. So that's really kind of my own motivation that I bring into it. And so as we're thinking about every year, what's the theme
Mm-hmm.
that we has been cast for the church, how do we drill it down? A big portion of that is, so how do we make it so that the women are learning, gaining, growing in their own personal lives and their spiritual lives? So that would be kind of overarching. And then after just much prayer and brainstorming and consideration, we end up offering opportunities of ministry and programming for the women throughout the year. And those opportunities look really different. Of
Okay.
course, we always have like the pre-COVID worlds and then COVID worlds, right? So
Right. That
what we
part.
could do before and now, and after is always very different. But there's always some kind of theme that deals with mental health and mental health awareness. There is physical health awareness built in there in some kind of way. I think the past 2 years, we've been strictly focusing in on just the mental health piece,
Yeah.
and then the physical health piece, but not so much in the sense of like get out, get fit, lose weight, all of that. We
Mm-hmm.
kind of toss that. Not that we're tossing it out the window. I think
Right.
we've gone there enough, but more so the physical health of just nutrition that is fueling your brain and your body, thinking along the lines of what are the key tools that we need to really be healthy
Mm-hmm.
um, in stressor times,
Mm-hmm.
but also in normal times. And I think when you're in times that are heightened, where we are all experiencing levels of trauma in different
Yeah.
ways,
Yeah.
it's really important for us to figure out how the food we eat plays a part in balancing the way our brain is processing and functioning everything that's going on around us, or how having conversations and just being able to name emotions, right? That's another big piece for me, is emotional health and well-being, and naming what we're feeling. So we usually tend to drill all of that down, and we have found that the other model that I have found has been, some things are great with large groups,
Mm-hmm.
but I have found with African American women, particularly in our church, smaller group gatherings allow space for much more transparency,
Okay.
and much more receptivity to what is being offered, and just a really good smaller community where individuals create covenant with one another to ensure that we're living out our best, and then checking in on one another even afterwards.
You gave some great tips there, because I think when I'm thinking about those organizations, those faith organizations that are trying to figure out, they want to do the health ministry but they're not really sure, do they create another health ministry? You've given a great nugget, because it sounds like you've incorporated health under an already existing women's ministry, right? And it's, I love the intergenerational piece, bringing different people who have different experiences, life experiences, to come together. And then also different structures, because oftentimes, too oftentimes enough, we do see church organizations where it's all the leaders get involved, but very rarely do you find those who are in different stages of activity in the church getting involved for the same common cause of designing and saying, hey, what is this ministry going to look like? And then making it even, that makes it more relevant for the community you're serving. And then
Absolutely.
being able to adjust according to what is happening. and having that flexibility. I love that notion. And definitely mental health. That's a whole health ministry in and of itself,
Yes.
especially after 2 years in a pandemic,
Mhm.
and just how we do that. You mentioned about the types of food, they call it junk food for a reason, right? And so just how we
Mhm.
incorporate those things. And as I mentioned, considering the past 2 years, and the impact that COVID 19 has had on churches. Providence is no exception, and communities of color, but specifically women. And women who live and work and support those communities. How should faith leaders be addressing those issues of health, considering that most congregations are composed of, statistically, you can go pretty much into any church and see large composition of women. What should faith leaders really be considering as part of their conversations, their teaching, and their even, you know, whatever else they do, and
Yeah.
say from the pulpit?
Absolutely. So I think the first thing I would say is just have the real conversations. I
Mm-hmm.
have found that oftentimes we skirt around health issues, or we'll kind of generally say something about it, or we know folks who are going through particular health issues. And so we'll put them on a prayer list and everyone's praying and we have the sick and shut in, but we're not talking about like what's the root of these health issues. And when we're talking about women, how certain types of health issues really are predominantly affecting women of color, right? And so just I think having those very real and honest conversations about health issues within our congregation, that can show up in the worship time. I mean, when we're preaching,
Mm-hmm.
there are many times, like, let's be honest and let's just give some real information, even in the sermonic moment, that's relevant to what's happening. When we deal with healing narratives in the gospel text, right? We don't gloss over the issues that are there to jump to the healing and the
Right,
miracle piece,
right.
but like, let's deal with what's happening socially in that context. And then how does that show up now in our current context, and how do we see very similar impacts within women, within any of our people within our communities? So I think making those conversations and then just creating the space, whether it's small group conversations or whatever it is, right? Creating the space to just have very real and honest conversations about the way many different issues of health run rampant through women's lives,
Yeah.
and not make any topic taboo.
Right.
That's the one piece, right? Let's get away from, oh, we don't touch that because those are women's issues. Well, no, 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 no. I
Right.
think we need to have these conversations, or it's all very funny. I was having a conversation a couple of weeks ago and talking about like feelings of anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And come to find out, like, you say something about to one person and they're like, oh yeah, I've had these feelings for a long time and just learned to live with them. And you start talking to people, and folks are around having these feelings, or figure trying to navigate and figure out something like anxiety from a very kind of low level to a very extreme level,
Right. Right.
and no one talks about it.
No one.
So everyone now is in a room navigating and battling their own anxiety, but they're in a room of sisters who also can
Also.
relate and who've either figured out what works and who sought help and can give advice, but we don't talk about it. So it's things like that where we can create spaces, I think, within congregational life
Yeah.
to just have these very honest and candid conversations around different issues of health. And then I would say not being afraid to engage the realities of the women in our community.
Yeah.
And so those conversations, we can't just like, okay, we had the conversation, now let's run away from it. We have to
Mm-hmm.
sit with these conversations and we have to engage
Absolutely.
the realities of the women in our community and what they are experiencing and what that means, and journey with them, and not just say, oh, we're going to pray this thing away and never talk about it again,
Mm-hmm.
but really and truly creating a relational environment that really does not just one person, the pastor, journeying along, but the congregation committing to
Yeah.
one another and being a part of the life journey of the women in the communities, because you're absolutely right. Most of our churches are composed of women.
Yeah.
You know, for the longest time, research has shown 80% of the church is women
Yes.
leading the church. That number has not changed.
Oh,
Research from like 30 years ago
has
said
not
it, and the
changed.
number still is the same in 2022. Well, if we're looking at a congregation and 80% of the women in the 80% of the members of the congregation are women, we should be engaging the realities of these women's lives and not asking them to check it at the door before they enter into the sanctuary, before they enter into the church building. So I think having those conversations, engaging the reality of women's lives, and then I would say encourage women to not be silent and to not feel like they have to be strong and carry the burden of whatever it is that they are experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
So we have, you know, I can't think of how many cases of women who've been experiencing particular health issues, whether it's breast cancer or infertility or whatever it is, and they feel like I have to just push through and I can never just have a moment to
Right.
weep or a moment to feel the feels. I can't. I just have to be the strong one and come in and do the yet. I may have this issue. I may be
Right.
experiencing this, but I'm here and I'm showing up and I'm ready to serve and I'm ready to work. Well, that's a fallacy. Like, we have to create these spaces where it's okay for women to lay down their armor, to lay down the strength that they carry, right? And for us to be able to just be in community with one another in different ways. And I think that becomes so important. How are we creating those spaces to be important? As you can see, I have a lot of things I can say about this.
No,
This is
you're
an area
fine.
I am quite passionate about.
No,
But I will say the final piece of it is for us in ministry, for ministry leaders to assess the spaces of imbalance that really become agents of exacerbating health issues
that's it.
within the church.
Yeah.
And so what are the oppressive and overwhelming spaces where there's no balance, but we are literally putting all this weight on particular women of the church to carry all of it in spite of what they're experiencing. And so now we are contributing to their health issues. Like, step back and assess where those imbalances lie within our congregation, and then do the real work of changing that, of subverting that system, and really looking at measures of equity and giving folks it's okay to not show up for church. It's okay to take a sabbatical if you need to.
Right.
It's okay to go tend to your health, right? Creating that environment. But I think it's really necessary for us to step back and just assess where those imbalances are.
And we call those, on the public health side, we call those social determinants of health. So we look at, those factors that impact our health and leave us in a disparity, and that causes disparity where we now, women of color, have higher rates of chronic disease, higher rates of heart disease. We die at a higher number to our white counterparts from heart disease, which is stress related oftentimes, cancer, again, those types of things. So again, it's addressing those elements that certainly come from all angles, not just, and the health of the church, the women's health in the church definitely spills over into the communities, because again, it's those communities where the women live,
Right.
as well as worship. And so addressing it from the inside and spilling it over. We could talk all day on
We
this.
can.
This is a whole nother session that we could do. We might have to come back and do a conversation part two.
I would
Um,
love it. Yes.
but I definitely want to thank you, Dr. Williams. Just thank you so much for your thoughtful and intentional responses, and how you not only the model of starting the women's ministry in the model that you used, that you worked, and you talked about the smaller groups, but then also the logic and the reasoning behind why churches who are thinking about developing health ministries may want to consider different topics and different ways to engage their congregation, and certainly including a component for women. So thank you so very much for your insight in this wonderful conversation. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It has been a joy. Listen, this is something I am passionate about and I love talking about. So anytime, I'm here for it.
Well, excellent, excellent. Well, I want to invite you, as well as others who are interested in learning more about sustaining a health ministry, or this topic or other topics. Please visit the Our Health Ministry website, and that is located at www.ourhealthministry.com. So again, thanks to Dr. Khalia Williams, and thanks also to the Morehouse School of Medicine's National COVID-19 Resiliency Network, which allowed us this opportunity and this space to provide for this conversation. So thank you again. Again, the joy was just, you did me well. I'm so proud and so honored to have had that conversation. And we will certainly look to see you all next time. Take care.